Do you like travelling?
Planning to work abroad next year?
Well, think again. I'm Jane.
I'm Alice,
and today we'll be talking about the big Brexit dilemma.
Is underway of tens of millions of votes in the EU referendum.
More than 30 million votes cast, each ballot counted by hand. People staying up all night, their faces etched with anxiety, a whole country on edge.
Electorate has taken the historic decision to withdraw from the European Union after more than 40 years of...
This means that the UK has voted to leave the European Union.
Then another surprise, the Prime Minister of Britain announcing his resignation, walking back into 10 Downing.
We'll be covering the impacts of the UK leaving the EU and how it will affect the travel visas and work permits. We'll also be covering the impacts that may arise regarding the free movement and healthcare issues for expats following the aftermath of Brexit.
Now, we're sure you've all heard of Brexit and its impacts it's having on not only the UK but also the EU. The UK voted to leave the EU on June 23, 2016 by a majority of 51.9 to 48.1%, with the 29th of March 2019 being the set date to leave. However, all the details of its exit still to be decided. As you can see, the demographic of the results indicate that the majority of people who voted to remain are of the younger generation, with the ages of 18 to 24-year-olds making up most of the vote to remain for both males and females.
However, it is ironic that the younger generations are the ones to be affected the most in the results of leaving the EU.
Many of those young voters demonstrated outside Parliament at the weekend to vent their anger at a decision they say was not theirs.
And we're the generation that's going to be completely screwed over by the recession, so I don't really see why the older generations who've already had their jobs and have their houses, how we're meant to get on with it now.
I really should have put a bit of thought into who this might affect. We're the ones who are hopefully going to have to live with this for 70 years. It's not those that are going to have to live with it, and it's going to be almost impossible to rectify now it's gone through. So just a sad, really, more sad than annoyed, really.
As you can see, a graph revealed by The Guardian shows how the majority of the UK citizens who are currently living in the EU are of working age, defeating the assumptions that it's mainly the older generation who moved to the EU to retire.
This proves that the younger generation are the most likely to be affected by the result and will have a major lack of opportunities regarding work placements in the EU after graduation, or those wanting a new career change in the EU.
The whole of the EU, and there's also the fact that you lose the access to jobs in the rest of the EU. For example, Theresa May has said that, the Tories' new immigration policies are basically going to make it so that in order to come to this country you need to be making at least £30,000. Now,
the average salary is 25,000, am I right?
Exactly. So if the EU reciprocates, does the same thing for us, which they have said in their, this is what we're going to do in the future thing, that means that will be what we have to do to go over there.
So essentially it provides a lot fewer opportunities to people either recently graduated or generally young people, young professionals, in terms of what you want to work in terms of how much money you're making, in terms of all of that. It adds a lot of complication and a lot less.
So what is the next step when travelling to another country?
Well, you've got your passport,
you've got your sunscreen,
shades on, but have you got your visa? The question lies as to what is going to happen to visas and free movement within the EU. Currently, UK citizens don't need to queue separately at border gates and breeze straight through the gates by simply presenting their passport.
As stated by ABTA, the EU's freedom of movement principle, enshrined in the Treaty for the European Union, guarantees the rights of individuals from EU member states to live, travel around and work in other EU member states. However, after Brexit, the UK will not be a part of the EU, so how will this affect us?
As stated by The Independent, it is likely that, in case of a no-deal Brexit, that British citizens would require visas simply to visit EU states.
This may result in harder borders and will result in a longer process getting into a country, a similar process to an ESTA visa when visiting the States.
Joins us now with more on this. She's a British migrant in Europe and the spokesperson for the advocacy group British in Europe. Hi, Laura. Thank you for joining us here on Euronews tonight. So you're among those living in the EU. How do you think the negotiations have played out?
Well, I think the negotiations have gone very badly if you're a British person living in Europe, because the final deal does not include free movement. And that is absolutely essential for many working people. And 80% of British people living in Europe are working age or younger. At the moment, cross-border movement, free movement, cross-border working rights, all those things have not been included in the deal, even though we were told that they would be, because we were promised that our lives would carry on as normal. So
A draft law has been put in place for the French government, stating that British nationals who are currently enjoying the privilege of free movement throughout the EU, and as quoted by The Independent, would face a requirement to present a visa to enter the French territory and to justify a residence permit to stay there.
This would therefore result in UK citizens joining a separate queue for non-EU citizens at borders, presenting visas along with further questioning on why they wish to enter the country within the EU.
However, it should be noted that both sides have taken many actions to allow the smooth running of free movement within the EU.
As Brexit talks intensify in London, the EU has said it will offer UK citizens visa-free travel in the event of a no-deal scenario.
This shows that the UK and the EU are trying to balance out the new regulations by working together, maintaining a good relationship on both sides even after Brexit.
It is unclear as to whether there will be a one-size-fits-all policy in terms of freedom of movement that the EU 27 states adopt, or whether each state is free to decide what terms and conditions will be offered to UK citizens looking to move to the EU.
It is likely that each state will have its own conditions and UK immigrants will be treated as any other nationality.
So, what about working in the European Union? Well, that will no longer be an automatic right. As stated by The Independent, the EU says you can come as a tourist,
to visit family and friends,
to attend cultural or sports events or exchanges,
business meetings,
media purposes,
medical treatment,
or for short-term studies or training and any other similar activities.
It does, however, say that visa waiver does not apply to persons travelling for the purpose of carrying out a paid activity in member states. For example, for those who come to work in the EU. The Express has stated that EU workers under the age of 30 will be offered 2 years working visas to help fill a shortage of low-skilled workers after Brexit. But the concession will only be made if EU countries offer Britons the same return.
Now this is a positive, as it does show that our leaders do recognise this issue and are doing their very best to make the deal fair on both sides, where Theresa May will offer citizens from EU countries a 2-year employment visa, as long as Britain is offered the same deal.
As it has been made clear by ABTA, the free movement of people facilitates easy and cost-effective hiring processes and helps the sector increase capacity quickly as demand in peak increases. Some regions have a particularly high dependency on immigrant labour in the sector.
If a Brexit were to occur, the travel sector could be faced with higher costs in recruiting and retaining staff from other EU countries. The sector could also lose some of the longer-term investment it has made in skills if employees' working rights are restricted or they are forced to leave.
What about those UK citizens who currently live in the EU?
Well, Brexit will result in many changes for the current expats living in the EU. These changes will include the working rights and changes in the current benefits from the UK healthcare and pension schemes.
Brexit may also affect the relationship between the UK and countries that were once united with the United Kingdom, such as Malta, which has a heavy British presence.
Making the case for Brexit here in Malta is in some ways quite symbolic. It gained independence from Britain in 1964, and today some 12,000 British people live here, making them the country's largest foreign community. The weather's much better, so is the food, and these British expats don't have to go through the awful bother of mastering a foreign tongue. That's because English is also an official language.
So what do some of these Brits abroad want from Brexit? Colin Pilling is a former RAF serviceman who's been in Malta for more than 2 decades.
One of the main things I would say to her is look after your British expat community and also our counterparts in the United Kingdom. If we lose the bilateral agreements, then pensions, healthcare, and all the ancillary ways of living here, and that is one of the major things that is worrying us.
I think pensions and healthcare are an issue, but I think, as long as you can get a deal, with the EU countries so that the people living in the EU, British people living in the EU, can remain, and I do feel that the people living from in the UK or from the EU should be able to remain.
So what will happen to the older generation living in the EU?
With a vista like this, the worries of Brexit seem a long way from the Spanish coastline. But for hundreds of thousands of Britons, they are very real indeed. Concerns in the town of Mijas about rights, jobs, and for the elderly in the expat population about healthcare. For the 18 years Josephine Sykes has lived here, she's been able to access free medical treatment as an EU citizen. She says Theresa May has to push for that to continue.
The main thing, I think, is the medical, especially when we're getting as old as I am, that if they stop it altogether, it's going to be a bit of a problem because, like I said, at my age, having private insurance, I wouldn't be able to afford it.
More than 300,000 expats live in Spain, and a third of that population is over 65.
Some here have told us they won't be able to stay if the system changes. Could an unintended consequence of Brexit be a flow of people to the UK? Not new migrants from across Europe, but Brits migrating back.
Similarly, Brits who live in Europe will also lose those rights, as well as losing your guarantee of free healthcare in the EU. And on top of that, the value of your UK state pension could be at risk down the line. However, before you start panicking, the government has said there is no need to worry. That's because if you're an EU citizen living in the UK, you can apply for settled status for £65. So, providing you can prove you live here and that you're not a security threat, all of your current rights and privileges will be protected.
Let's see what Roger thinks in your home country. Roger, how long have you been in Limoges?
We've been here 15 years.
How do you feel about what's being discussed at the moment?
Extremely worried about all kinds of issues like healthcare, pensions because of my age. I'm also very conscious of other people who are living and working. We've got friends who have got their own business with 3 teenage daughters. One has gone to university in the Netherlands. They're not sure what's going to happen with the other 2.
But let me put this to you, Roger. Let me put this. If it is reciprocal on the terms that Theresa May wants, you've been there for 15 years, you're likely to just be able to stay as you were. And if it's the European Union's way, as Donald Tusk has put it, well, you'll just stay regardless as well. So do you really feel that you need to worry about it?
Worried in terms of what happens from now on. I'm sorry about the telephone.
That's all right. That's all right. I'm sure it's plenty of people calling you to find out what's going on with the European Union. There you go. Yeah. Someone else will answer it for you. Just tell us about being worried.
It's a question of will the same rights apply? Now, Theresa May has not made it clear. You've got a document from the EU Commission which is very clear, very detailed. All the rights are spelt out. If the paper on Monday matches that, all well and good. We have no problem.
Yeah.
But it's the way in which the UK government has been not saying anything.
Let me just
making vague promises.
Let me just ask all three of you, and starting with you, Roger, whether people in France, French people, have treated you any differently as a Brit living there since the Brexit vote?
Not at all, no.
OK. Lara, have people treated you differently?
All is not lost since UK leaders recognise the importance of protecting those currently living in the EU.
Leaders are trying their very best to push deals that will help to continue supporting them whilst living abroad.
And finally, the UK will continue to export and uprate the UK state pension and provide associated healthcare cover within the EU. We will continue to protect the export of other benefits and associated healthcare cover where the individual is in receipt of those benefits on the specified cut-off date. And subject to negotiations, we want to continue participating in the European Health Insurance Card Scheme so that UK cardholders could continue to benefit from free or reduced cost healthcare while on a temporary stay in the EU, and vice versa for EU cardholders visiting the UK. Mr. Speaker, this is a fair and serious offer. Our obligations in the withdrawal treaty with the EU will be binding on the UK as a matter of international law.
It should also be noted that EU countries recognise the importance of UK citizens working in their country,
where workers have helped contribute greatly to the local economies, therefore benefiting the local communities.
The lack of clarity is bothering not just the British here, but locals in a town where the expat influence on the local economy is everywhere. From restaurants to the barbers and the nail salon, Brits are running businesses, renting or owning space, offering services. No surprise then that the local mayor is pushing hard to maintain the rights of UK citizens in Spain.
The weight of the British community here in Mijas is very important, so important that we're economically dependent on them. They are neighbours like everyone else, obviously, but they add to the economy.
And it is their contribution which leaves many optimistic that a deal will be done, not just for British people here in Europe, but Europeans in the UK. The expats need Spain, and Spain really likes having them.
As stated by ABTA in 2014, the UK's net contribution to the EU was around £9.8 billion, which equates to 0.6% of UK gross domestic product. The contribution for 2015 is forecast to be £8.5 billion. The UK covers 12.6% of the total EU budget and is the third largest contributor.
56% of UK outbound travel and tourism spending goes to EU countries, 19.76 billion in 2014, with a total of 27% of all UK emigrants migrated to EU countries for work-related engagements.
Okay. So in conclusion, these reasons alone are enough for the UK and the EU to want to prioritise their close relationship, compensating for new comparable laws and working with each other in order to keep up the success and the relationship on both sides in the future.
The realistic view of what the future holds for both the UK and the EU is that most things will continue with little disruption, maintaining a good relationship where laws will work both ways with cooperation from both sides.